Welcome back. You are watching Newscentre. India and Australia are set to bolster their strategic partnership further. A 4-day Economic Trade Delegation Summit scheduled to commence today will be aimed at boosting trade ties between the two nations. The summit is likely to focus on industries including education, space, agriculture, healthcare and much more. I caught up with Peter Dutton, leader of opposition in Australia, and I began by asking him about his first strategic visit to India as leader of opposition and efforts to boost India-Australia trade partnership.
Well, there's an incredible dynamic between our two countries. This is my first trip here as Leader of the Opposition, but I was here as Defence Minister and here as Assistant Treasurer many years ago. And the diaspora community now in Australia is quite a remarkable achievement. People who are succeeding in business in every endeavour of life. And it's a great celebration of the success of the two relationships, of the relationship between the two countries, and I'm very, very pleased to be here.
Right. Last year, both countries had concluded the ECTA. What will be the purpose of this strategic alliance which will now be launched? How is this going to further the trade relations between the two countries? The exact purpose of your visit?
Well, there's a huge opportunity across many sectors. Obviously, critical minerals is important to India. Mining is a very important sector to the Australian economy. There's an enormous opportunity in the agriculture sector, in defence industry, defence material as well, particularly given the uncertainties that we're seeing in the world at the moment. The Quad has been, I think, a crowning achievement in the next stage of the relationship. But we have the opportunity to take it further, and the people-to-people links, the human bridge is very important in the negotiations and the successes that we've been able to achieve already. I think it's really just the start.
Right. Right now, both sides are talking about concluding the CECA, the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreements. That will be an important one. But before we even do that, are there any issues that Australian businesses are facing with the agreement and how it's being implemented that you would like to raise with Indian officials during this visit?
To be perfectly honest, I haven't heard any grievances at all. There are a lot of dual nationals and people who know the Indian economy well, know the bureaucracy and the processes of establishing and doing business here in India. They understand, as Australian residents, the system in Australia as well. And so that synergy is important, and it helps people traverse any of the difficulties or hesitations or problems that might be facing other companies. But I think by and large there's a lot of success and people are very positive about the arrangement.
Right. The CECA, how is it going to further boost trade relations between the two countries, according to you?
Well, if I give the example of agriculture, I think there is the opportunity for us to look at ways in which, with different commodities, in the agriculture sector, Australia is a trusted brand, but equally India has a number of commodities which will do well in the Australian market, and it's a matter of removing barriers. And I think as time goes on, there will be grievances and there will be issues that arise that can be addressed in subsequent iterations of agreements, and there'll be opportunities as well which can be expanded on where there might have been a hesitation to start with, or a thought that perhaps that element of the relationship or the agreement won't take off, but it actually has. So I think there's agriculture, as I say, I think defence material is a very important one as well. There are a lot of Australian companies who are working here in this market, and I think opportunities for manufacturing in this market and export back to Australia as well.
No, you've been emphasising on critical minerals a lot. Would there be anything that you expect the Indian government to do in order to diversify our relationship on critical minerals? Because this is an area of concern for the entire world, and the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine war and now the Israel-Hamas war have only increased fears about the supply chains.
Yes, and there's an enormous amount of demand for that product out of Australia as well. So many people are competing for that market. It's a competitive one, and I think the opportunities will be there for people who can add value into their own supply chains and but there are many aspects to it, and it's not just in relation to mining or defence or agriculture. Education obviously is a very significant opportunity, both here in India now, with a presence from universities from Australia, they're trusted brands, but also it's a very significant part of the Australian labour market, the ability for people to be educated, but also to participate in the economy. The amazing stories now in the diaspora community of people who have started with nothing, educated themselves, worked hard, amassed a fortune, and provided now for the next generation and beyond.
Right. I'd like to ask you now a bit about geopolitics as well. If we look at the Israel-Hamas war, which has been raging on for 25 days now, do you think this is a crisis for the leadership of all countries? Do you think this is a test of leadership right now?
Well, in part it's a test for the West, and the West needs to stand up, as the West has done in relation to Ukraine. The slaughter of women and children in Ukraine by Vladimir Putin's forces is something that is a complete abomination, and the sanctions that have been imposed, the way in which countries have come together to work together to put pressure on Russia has been important as well. Nobody wants to see conflict anywhere in the world, but on the 6th of October, Israeli forces weren't going into the Gaza Strip. They were content on their side of the border, if you like. When the terrorist attacks took place on the 7th of October, that changed the dynamic dramatically, and we now see the horrific circumstances where Hamas leaders are trying to camouflage themselves within hospitals or within refugee camps, and the sacrifice that they make of those individuals reflects their own lack of values and humanity. That they would put those people at risk or seek to use them as a human shield is an abomination. And the fact is that children were abducted, young partygoers were driven into the desert and machine gunned down, people were decapitated, children were abducted, women raped, and that's the dynamic that Israel is facing. Of course, there are many, it's the mantra of Hamas that they want to drive the Jewish people into the sea, and living with that existential threat is something that is hard for us to imagine. India has issues around terrorism, as Australia does, terrorism threats, but that existential threat that Israel faces is something that I think all of us, unless we're living it, find it hard to comprehend.
But the approach taken by the West so far, do you think it's working? Because this has divided the world like never before. Even India had abstained on a vote on a Gaza ceasefire. Give us a sense how you view the Australian leadership at this juncture, and do you think the Western leadership is working right now in bringing this war to an end, making sure that the two-state solution works in future?
Well, I think the influence of the United States, for example, has been crucial in making sure that there's a clear message to Tehran, a clear message to Hezbollah, very significant efforts made by the United States, the Brits and others to try and ensure that this doesn't expand into a regional conflict. So in that sense, I think there has been success, perhaps temporary, but certainly for the time being, that has worked to the credit of President Biden, and but there's a long way to go. And I don't agree with the analysis that it's without precedent. I mean, this conflict has been going on for a long period of time, and in many ways it's unlikely to ever be resolved, tragically. Those historical disputes and just the animosity, particularly the anti-Semitism, as we're seeing on the rise now around the world, is something that doesn't belong in the modern world. 6 million Jews were exterminated, and this is the worst attack on people of Jewish faith since that horrible period in history.
Right. Speaking about another issue which is very close to Australia, and that is India-Canada relations right now because of the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Sikh activist. The Five Eyes partners had shared information about this. India has expelled Canadian diplomats. Visa services were also suspended. Now they're being resumed in certain categories. How do you see the situation between India and Canada right now?
Well, it's not for me to comment on as an outsider. Certainly from Australia's perspective, we have a deep respect for the Indian people, for the relationship that we have. The Quad is important and I think reflective of how important we see India as a partner and friend. And it's important for us to continue to work closely together in circumstances where there are tensions to be able to resolve those. But obviously the situation in relation to Canada is acutely felt here in India. People have raised it with us, but not for me to comment on as a visitor to India. My focus has been on the relationship between Australia and India.
You've come here with a 20-member business delegation to form a strategic alliance. We're talking about a CECA right now. What is the threat that you see from the rise of China, both in terms of challenging the sovereignty of other countries in the South China Sea and also expansionist tendencies towards countries like India and also economic expansionism through the Belt and Road? How do you think you would like to, Australia and India, to counter that?
Well, all of us have a deep trading relationship with China and we want to see that expand. It's been a very significant part of the Australian economic success story, and we have 1.2 million people of Chinese origin living in Australia. Wonderful Australians, work hard, have contributed significantly to the fabric of Australian society. At the same time, though, China under President Xi is a different China, and many people have recognised that, the human rights abuses that continue, the difficulties in the South China Sea with the Philippines, most recently on the land border with India as well. These are all very significant issues, and the common ingredient here is not that India has changed her values or that Australia has changed her values or New Zealand has or the Philippines. The Chinese aggressive approach toward the Philippines, for example, is something that we shouldn't accept. We've seen footage of near contact between aircraft and naval vessels, etc., in the South China Sea as well, and they're very aggressive acts. We want peace to be maintained. We want the trading relationship to continue to grow, and that's something that causes us very significant concern.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Newscentre. More news and updates continue right here.